Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Leah Witman Moore. We're going to be talking about living with children with disabilities. So, Leah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. This is a big topic. So many of us have children with different disabilities. So it can be frustrating at times, to say the least.
Yes.
So I think this is going to be a great topic. But let's start off like I usually do. Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Sure. So I am a high school English and theater teacher, and my husband is a theater teacher, and we sort of dreamed of a life of traveling with delicious curly-haired children, and that's what things look like before you get married. And then it has been very, very different. So I have 3 children. My oldest daughter is now 10, and she has a rare disability called Cri Du Chat, which is a deletion of the 5th chromosome. And we were told when she was about 18 months old, we got her diagnosis, and the doctor said, "I'm not sure she'll ever walk or talk. Good luck, come back for the next appointment." And then to fast forward the story, although there's a lot there to talk about, our twin boys were born 4 years later. And we thought one of them might have needed brain surgery, and we thought the other one might have had cancer. So everything that we knew about, we didn't know a lot about parenting because we were new parents, but everything we anticipated happening was kind of thrown out the window, and we've been left to be flexible and make sense of all of these very different situations. And that's where we are now, with healthy children that have a lot of things going on.
So it's interesting that you talk about your oldest with the chromosome deletion. I have a daughter who has DiGeorge syndrome, which is a deletion of part of the 22 chromosome.
Okay.
And it causes just an insane amount of different things to go wrong with these kids, and you never know which of the 200 symptoms or issues you're going to end up with.
Correct.
So it makes it challenging, to say the least.
Yes, you have to be very flexible as a parent. So
yeah, and it's hard sometimes because it's like, okay, is this related to DiGeorge, or is this related to just her being a child or a teenager?
Right. Right. Yes. I had that conversation this morning, so I definitely understand.
So how do you cope with being a parent of a child or children with disabilities, and B, the stigma around people with disabilities?
So I noticed as a teacher, I was trained to work with children with disabilities, and I like to use the term politely invisible, that for the most part, this population of students aren't being outright bullied, but it's kind, but it's not inclusive. And it's something I've always noticed in my own practice as a teacher. And then when it became my own child, my daughter's abilities are very obvious when she walks into a room. It's very clear she does not have a hidden disability. And it has been very interesting how the stigmas of what it means to have a disability have sort of carried into her life and even into my own. So people with disabilities are usually reflected in texts as being a burden to society, as unable to fully participate, as historically in literature, they were the villain, the Captain Hook kind of characters. And I realized that so many people carried on to that stigma for so long that now they looked at my family almost with well-meaning pity. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. This must be so sad. And it's not that it's not hard, but I want to really reframe the conversation that being a family that has a child with disability does not have to be sad. We are not crying every day. There, again, are hard things. So it's finding that balance between we are a family and also we are a family with some unusual different circumstances. So I started to write, and it's how I began to make sense of fighting through some of these stigmas. And I started a blog called Loving You Big, where I began to talk about the real family behind the diagnosis. It wasn't enough just to learn about it on a website or talk to the doctor, but I wanted to know what that meant when I tried to take my daughter to the grocery store, how to get her in safely, how to get her out safely. She's not going to put a shoe on. She's wearing a sweater when it's 100 degrees out. These real life things. And the more I started to write, the more I connected to a community of other people who had similar stories to share. And it inspired me to write my memoir, which is also called Loving You Big. And it's about how we can move to more of a understanding in our society to fight these stigmas of ableism and to reframe what a conversation looks like when we talk about a kid with a disability and what it means to move from just being kind to really being inclusive.
One of the terms that I've heard in the recent years is, instead of disability, is different abled or different ability.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that, because that's exactly what it is. They're just different from somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's been so much language. I know people now are moving away from special needs, and in education, we talk about differentiation, how we give different information out to different students. And we differentiate based on interest, and we differentiate based on readiness. And I like those terms because the idea is our ability levels, our readiness levels to access the world are just different for all different types of students. So one of my children might want to access the world more through technology, and another one might want to do it more through art, and one is not better than the other. But we have these societal norms that say this is what it looks like to participate in society. And if your child doesn't fit that mold, it becomes an extra hurdle for you to overcome. So that's what I'm really trying to do with my work. For so many families who are just getting these diagnoses like you and I have, which are these rare things. What does it mean to take care of your child? And then what does it mean to then be the parent for that child?
Because you're not only the parent for them, you're the advocate for them.
Correct.
With the medical system, with the school system, with the general public, you become their advocate.
Correct.
And, I know that I've struggled and fought with the school system for the last 12 years, and I am so glad she's graduating this year. I am so over it, let me tell you. That they put this child with severe learning disabilities into quote unquote normal classes. And she's like, how am I supposed to do this? She doesn't have reading comprehension. So if she reads something, she will immediately forget what she's read. if she even comprehends what she has read. So things like that. Yet this year we have her in advanced composition. It's like, seriously.
Right. Are we meeting the needs of the child? Exactly.
And we're not, because they base education and the standards on the average child as opposed to individual needs.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things from the teacher side that's important to empower parents to learn about their cultural capital and what rights they have to go in and advocate for their child, and what placement and what classes and what supports are in place on the IEP or whatnot, is really important and really hard work.
It is. And, as a parent, you have to really be the one that stays on top of the school system. Because if it's like having a kid, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Sure.
So I have found that you really have to stay on top of the school system.
Sure.
To follow the IEP.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's talk about, let's kind of talk about that, how, for parents maybe who are just starting out with schooling, and they don't know how to navigate the world of IEPs and things like that. What are some tips that they can take, especially now with the school year starting,
yes,
to get the ball rolling, to make sure that their kids are successful for the year?
Yes, I think that question, I think the first thing to remember is that you always have the right to an advocate, and you can always have the right to someone else coming to your meeting to support you in that meeting. So there's a lot of people who are advocates for children with special needs. And that if anyone listening feels like they're over their head and they're not sure what to do, that they can reach out within their school district and get that support. Now, sometimes that comes at a financial cost, and sometimes then the next step is reaching out within your community. So knowing, for example, what options of classroom placements there are, and where you live, the names might change, but there might be something like a self-contained class, and then there's the co-taught class, and then there's the general education class for the most part. So knowing first what population of students your child might belong in or be a good fit for. And then from there, knowing what supports you might want to advocate for. So the school doing their due diligence would have done the testing and come back with results. And I always think it's really important for a parent sitting at those meetings to hold on tight, because even as an educator, and I've sat on the other side of the table listening to my daughter being at the 0 percentile, the 0.5 percentile, 1 percentile, it feels like little knives are being thrown at you. And then you have to remember they're just numbers, and there are other parts we teach to the whole child. So we can talk about her socialization, we can talk about parts of her memory. So helping a parent, to support a parent through that process, to remember it's not just about those numbers. And then the next layer is what services and supports are going to be in place. Are we looking at speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, et cetera? And then also, as you're mentioning, is different testing available? It's a huge process. And I really encourage parents to go in almost with their wish list. This is for example, when my daughter started school, we were so worried about her on the playground. We thought that she would be hurt on the playground. And that was our number one. We knew we wanted her to be safe. We would get to the learning, but she was 6 years old and we wanted to make sure she wasn't going to get hurt. So that was the number one thing I wanted to talk about at the meeting. And once we accomplished that, I had 2 other things on my list that if we had time for, I'd like to talk about. And I think I've always gone in with that mindset that I'm not going to get everything all at once, but if I can keep talking through what's important and prioritize and have that open communication with my team, then I can be more successful and not feel quite so overwhelmed. The other thing I want to add, and this is a small but important detail, is I liked the IEP day used to feel, it so stressful. And now I've begun to reframe it as almost a day to celebrate my child. So after the meeting, might take her out for a little lunch date, and we do something that's a real high interest. And whatever I leave that meeting with, I get to end it celebrating the most beautiful parts of my child. And I think that's what's really important when you're raising a kid who has such different access to the world, that you keep reminding yourself of what is so special and beautiful about them. So that's my little tidbit I just learned.
I like that. I wish I had known that years ago. I would have done that with mine instead of, we usually had the meetings either before school or right after school. So,
yeah.
That would have been a good idea. But usually, she wasn't in the meetings.
Sure.
And then as she got older, she still, even in high school and stuff, she didn't want to be included.
Yeah. And I know a lot of parents that actually sometimes then take the day for themselves. So their child still stays in school and they go out and get a manicure, or go get a cup of coffee, and a little celebration of self. So I think as long as there's some celebration happening, it's important.
I actually just went home and went to work.
That's what I used to do too.
So this has been some great information about schooling and stuff. Like when Isabella first started school, you couldn't really understand her. She's been in speech therapy since she was 3, so 15 years. And my biggest concern when she first started school was that she was going to get picked on and bullied because she talked different. And so that was definitely with preschool and kindergarten, that the biggest concern I had with her teachers was to make sure that didn't happen. And they all assured me that, kids at that age, they don't see it differently. They can understand her better than adults can, which was true, because I used to always have my youngest translate. What does she say? I have no idea what she's telling me. And so, just being open and honest about your fears and concerns, having that good communication with the teacher, with your case specialist, and all of that. I am emailing the school counselors and stuff like constantly about things. It's super important to have that open line of communication.
Absolutely. And sometimes it means that you have to process what you want to say with somebody outside of that first, whether that's getting some support with your own mental health, whether that's talking to a partner or a family member. And then once you kind of land on, I'm, in this example, concerned about her socialization, then you can go in with that information. I see sometimes a lot of people use the IEP space as almost a bit of therapy, and they're working through it there. And then the meeting time is taken up. So I think that is really important for people to try to land on something when they go into the room. And of course, they can ask questions, and of course, they can bring several things to the table. But doing some of that work outside is also just really helpful as the parent who has to maintain being a caretaker. Yeah,
absolutely. And, and when you're in those IEP meetings and they are telling you, well, her reading is in the, 5th percentile and she's reading at a much lower grade level, or, whatever it is that they're telling you, also ask about the wins. What are the wins that they're having? Because it can feel depressing. It can feel like you're failing your child because they're not scoring high on these stupid tests that I absolutely can't stand. That's a whole nother show. So it can feel depressing and debilitating.
Yes.
Because you don't always know how to help your child learn.
Yes. No, I agree.
So definitely, make sure you ask the teachers and stuff, what are some of the positives? What are some of the wins that you've seen? Get some of that good feedback too. I've been lucky in most of my IEP meetings. I got all the good feedback.
Yes.
They let off with that.
Yes. Good. Those are good teachers then. That's good.
Yeah.
It's part of our protocol. Good.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what are some other things that we need to know as parents with, children with disabilities, as far as, being their advocates, being their voice, and just making sure that they're successful and stuff growing up and going through school and all of that?
I think there's a fine balance between wanting to hold on so tightly to your child and also letting them have experiences that neurotypical kids might have. So I think it's important work as a parent to really listen to your child. And I work with a lot of students who are nonverbal. So when I say listen, I don't necessarily mean with verbal language, but
Right.
children will tell you where their interests lie. And I think being able to access communities beyond maybe even just the academic setting, whether when you put on music, that child lights up and starts dancing, and see if there's a dance class in your community, or sports, for example, or art, or whatever it might be. I think the more you can access your community, the more you fight the feeling of being isolated. That there are so many late, long nights where you're saying, no one's going to understand this. I don't know anybody else who's going through this. And you might know someone else with a disability, but every child is so different. And getting a child out into a community not only gives the parents the support, but also adds that social emotional piece that all kids need to thrive. And I think that is really important work. And that sometimes might take some creativity, some connection based on where you live, based on where you have access to, but not being afraid to ask for help, not being able to ask another parent where they did this or where they got that, and really accessing that community is so important. And in the days of COVID and social media, a lot of families with kids like mine were already not going out of the house very much because it's just too difficult to have that many transitions a day. So in a way, COVID felt like just another day. But having that online support, reaching out to different people, you don't even have to live in the same state, can help those feelings of isolation for both you and your child. So I think that's really important.
I agree. Honestly, COVID was one of the best things that could have happened for us because we switched to virtual learning.
Mm-hmm.
I could never be a homeschool parent. I'm just not that kind of a parent. I do not have that patience, So, but switching to virtual learning and, with her being in high school and everything, was just a blessing for us because she has social anxiety. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of times she missed so much school every year because she has the anxiety. The anxiety trigger, makes her feel nauseous. Well, she has a phobia of vomiting. She has a emetophobia. So it would trigger her phobia, which would make her anxiety go more. And it would just be this big vicious circle or cycle, So the virtual learning for us was just, probably one of the best things that came out of COVID.
I mean, it's wonderful that that positive can come out of something really hard. And I hear that all the time. So I think that's exactly the point of really looking at your child and what do they need and what situations can I put them in where they'll be successful.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Leah, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can listeners find your blog and find you?
Yes. So my blog is lovingyouBig.com. And that's also all my social media things is Loving You Big. And then my memoir is coming out in September, and it'll be in where books are sold, but also Amazon might be the fastest place to get it. So it's also called Loving You Big.
Awesome. And I'm not sure if we're pre-recording this, so I think this is going to air in September. Okay. But listeners, the drill. I will put all the links down in the show notes. You just go over to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Leah's show. All her contact information will be there for you.
And I always like to say, if you write to me, I'll always write back. Because when I was new to this world of parenting, I would write to all of these people, all these questions. And it's nice when someone writes back to you. So feel free to reach out. If you have a tip or a question, I'll do my best to get you into the right hands.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. And listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. We'll talk to you in the next show.